Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Bridging Leadership Gap. My name is Florin Lungu, and I'm so delighted to be with you today to talk about a communication gap. And I'm joined by my teaching partner, Alena Ipanova. Welcome, Alena.
Hi, Florin. Thank you so much for your always warm welcoming. Good to be here with you. And so excited about today's conversation. One of my favorite topics, actually.
Yeah, I know this is an important topic for both of us and something that we're really passionate about. So, why don't we jump right in and define kind of this communication gap? What's this gap?
hmm Okay, I would encourage everyone who is listening to actually ask themselves this question: what do you think communication gap is? And from my perspective, I would say that this is the gap between your intention, the outcome that you plan to reach with your message, and the actual outcome. What is the result? What is the impact of it? Is it in alignment with your intention, or it's something different? And here we have a space for communication gap and misunderstandings that might happen. And ultimately, it's not just about the verbal part, because all the nonverbal context and emotions, how we sign, body language, so many factors that play a role, but it's a lot about listening as well. So communication is not that much about words, but it's about our ability to listen and to see how others actually understood. Did they understand what we meant to say or not? So that would be rather long answer to this question. But I'm curious to hear from how you experience that, and if you have any examples to share to exemplify it as well, if you've ever experienced communication gaps.
Absolutely, yeah. So I truly agree with what you shared up until now, and what it does, and this is one of the biggest realization I had. Like I was studying John Maxwell material on communication. He has a couple of books on that, and one thing that really struck with me was that he said, you know, the responsibility for the communication always lies on the side of the communicator, because
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking that, well, they don't understand me. I was very clear. I don't know why they don't do what I said they should be doing, and I was more or less blaming the recipient. But he says that if communication hasn't taken place the way we want, if there's a gap between, as you say, our intention and the outcome, it's always because of something we've done or we didn't do, and that's something that is difficult to kind of accept, right? Because we always think,
Mm.
well, it's not only my fault, right? There are also maybe other people involved, and that's true. But what I learned is that I cannot force or influence other people to change their behavior. I cannot influence them to, maybe I can to some extent through my communication, but the only thing that I have control of is my action and my communication. So if we accept that communication, if we have experienced this communication gap, is something that we're responsible for and it's our responsibility, I think that's where we actually take control of the situation. And that's what we share today is going to help us, improve our communication. If we blame other people, and this is my experience, was us and them, this is a mindset that I think it's one of the biggest challenges in organization, and doesn't matter how small or big. It's even sometimes in families, right? The teenagers, you say, oh, them our parents do not understand us, or grandpa doesn't understand us, it's us and them. In my a story that I'm reminded of is kind of my first days in a new organization, and I was kind of um, walking around, following a more senior person, and I would follow this person around the landscape, and he would introduce me to the different teams, and he would say, well, these are the software development people. We don't talk to them. These are the 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 salespeople, or whatever team was. And all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, I was new in the organization. I was getting to know the culture. I was already programming to us and them mindset. And if I see this gap, showing up, it's probably the most prevalent kind of body language language that you hear whenever someone talks about us and them. That's an indication that they have a communication gap.
Mm-hmm. This is a very good example. And just building up on your definition also about the responsibility for communication, I think I still feel that communication is a two-way street. And if we take ourselves out of the blaming equation, it's not about blaming, but as a listener, for example, I can also take responsibility to check in with you if I understood correctly, especially if it's crucial, and especially if it is something that concerns safety issues, because we all work in different contexts, right? Where one misunderstanding can cause critical damage, and possibly people might lose lives because of that. And we have lots of examples like this. So I would say here, I suggest everyone take responsibility, not just for making sure that your message is coming across as you intended, but also as we listen to what is being said, to address if we do not understand something or ask questions. And this is also a part of communication competence. How do we check in with people? How do we ask for feedback? How do we share that we disagree or we want to say no, still remain respectful and things like that? So it's quite complicated and fascinating process.
It is, yeah. And if we think about communication, it seems to be one of the most important skills that we can develop as leaders, as individuals. I know you have some take on that, and one of the things that I'm reminded of is, I think it was a quote by Warren Buffett, where he said, he's one of the probably the wealthiest people in the world. He said that if he would go back to school and he would focus on one thing, he would focus on the ability to learn how to communicate. Now, and it comes from someone that is quite successful. So it seems like we kind of consciously know about the need for improving our communication, but we kind of default back into maybe a mindset or a culture where we forget about it, and we kind of a little bit too much focus on us and our message, and not necessarily focus on the audience. So I'd like to get your take on what are some things that you see, some basics of communication, regardless of, let's look at it from a more smaller scale perspective. So in a team that is, before we go international or global, let's talk about a team that could be even placed and located in the same building or in the same city. What are some things, some challenges you see in communication when you work with teams?
This is a brilliant question, Florin. Thanks for asking. And actually here, it doesn't really matter if the team is homogeneous in terms of the cultural backgrounds, if they are in the same location, or, okay, we have like hybrid mode and remote mode, and there are some specifics to that, how we build relationships, how we build trust, because these are essential components for communication as well. So I wouldn't differentiate. I would bring it all to the interpersonal point, because even intercultural communication today is not international. It's about interpersonal. The only difference is that we might have different cultural lenses, and even living within the same organizational culture, the same national culture, we might still have different experiences that shift our lenses, and we look at things from different perspectives. So what I'm going to talk about is equally important for both, like local teams, homogeneous teams, or intercultural teams, I would say. And one of the aspects here in relation to communication, we touched upon that in one of our shows, that it can be direct and indirect communication. And it can be shaped by our personal experiences. It can be shaped by the culture we grew up in, because somewhere the messages are very explicit. You just say what you mean. And in some contexts or environments, it's more like communication is more subtle. It kind of, you're supposed to read between the lines. And when we have these different styles, without like understanding, they might collide, they might just assume the meaning when the meaning that they assumed is not even there. And I see those clashes quite often between people as well, regardless of the national culture, that some of them communicate very directly, straightforward, and others might take it as disrespectful or rude when it comes to feedback, for example. And if your communication is subtle, in between the lines, high context, your intention might be not to hurt, not to do any harm, but in the outcome, you get that some critical points are missed because you didn't communicate it clearly and directly enough. So this is one of the most common gaps in communication that I see. Like, it goes beyond culture, but culture plays a role there, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like our personal preferences impact or influence the way we communicate. And we may think that people want to, we may think about this golden rule, right? There is a golden rule says treat people the way you want to be treated. But if we apply this to communication, would mean communicate with people the way you want.
Backfires. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So here is where we say, I don't even know if this is called that way, but we call it the platinum rule, which says,
Yeah.
treat people the way they want to be treated. And we
Mm.
see this so many times. For example, the easiest example that when I lead teams through this, sometimes they don't really see it, but I ask them, think about when you offer someone a gift. How do you decide what you buy? Many times people buy what they would like to receive, not necessarily what the person would like to receive. And that's where, if we really want to give something to someone that is of value for them, not for us, then we have to put some work to understand what it is that they want, what are some of the passions, what would be something that they will value. And so it is with communication. So that example with the gift seems to land with people. They say, oh yeah, that's right, I mean, we tend to, wouldn't it be nice to receive this? Well, I don't know. I'm not
Mm.
the receiver. I'm not the recipient. So there is an element, as you're sharing, of us really needing to be aware of how we tend to communicate, and if that communication matches, the style of the recipient. And then you mentioned something that I think is very important. You mentioned the word lens. And I think that's also very important, because our past experiences, our beliefs, all that makes us unique will create the lens that we actually filter the
Mm.
information that would be given to us. And so if we, let's say, put 2 or 3 pieces of information in one communication, or in one sentence, if we put in writing, then how do we know which of the 2 or 3 pieces of information the recipient is going to believe is most important? We have almost no control over that, unless we know very well the recipient, or we point them out, this is actually what I want to say by this. And that's where we sometimes, we assume that, well, wasn't it obvious that this piece was actually the most important part of all my communication? Well, I don't
Mm.
know. Was it obvious? So
Yeah, this is a good point. And the role of the context as well. How much shared context do we have? And what is your context? And what is my context when I'm receiving this message? In which context am I reading it? And maybe we will not go to this point today, but there is also difference in verbal and written communication, obviously, and how we perceive those. But we are talking in general terms, right? So about communication gaps and how to break silos in teams.
Yeah, and you mentioned the context is also very important in an organization. Now, if we talk about organizations, then I have found that is the culture of the organization that creates the context. Because communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like something, let's say, you know, Nike, it's known by just do it, okay? And you know, it used that phrase or that coin that words, you know, and it's if you think about you not being, let's say, believe you're not ready to do something, and they usually, you know, work with athletes and sport, so just do it would mean like, okay, I know it's uncomfortable, just do it. But if that would be the logo of, let's say, a bungee jumping company, it will mean completely different things. Just do it. When you are there and you want to jump, it's completely different. Or, you know, a barber shop, and that would be just do it. So the company, the culture within the company sets the context of the communication. And something that could mean something in a context, it would mean something different in a context. And that's where now we're adding this cultural layer of the company itself. So now we're not talking about the people culture. I'm not talking your, Swedish culture, Chinese culture, Japanese culture. We're talking the culture inside the organization that is creating the context in which the communication happened. And that's where we think if the culture in the organization allows for these silos and allows for the us and them mindset, then the culture will actually exacerbate or will amplify the gap. But if, let's say, the culture doesn't allow for us to ever use the word them and us, what if the leader would call out someone saying, well, you know, this is not how we talk about each other here. We don't talk about us and them. Then all of a sudden, perhaps the gap will be smaller.
I like these examples as well. And you also exemplify that there are different layers and different gaps. They might be interpersonal if we talk about, for example, my relationships with my manager or my relationships with my team members, my colleagues, and then we take team culture, because team culture can be different from the organizational culture as well, and they can coexist, or they can be well integrated or exist as separate parts as well. We saw examples of those. And then there might be gaps between the departments. There might be gaps between the values that organization promotes and the actual doings. So on many levels. But I would say maybe we choose which level we address today. So maybe we take it to more interpersonal and team level to cover those aspects, because I think it will create more actionable outcome for those who listen to us today. Like what I can do after watching this show to actually shift my communication a little bit or make it more intentional. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. So what can someone do if they become aware that there is a communication gap? And let's say, first of all, from the perspective of the team member, and then if you are the leader of a team and you see these communication gaps in your organization, what could people do? What would be some of your first kind of tips for them?
Good question. Actually, from what I see, very often many people are not aware that they have communication issues. And I see often the culture of quick fixes. The problem happens, the challenge, and then they need to solve it immediately to move forward to the next step. And then when I did my market research, almost all of the people I interviewed in all management positions, they mentioned the fact that, okay, we keep measuring the things, and in terms of communication, there are issues that are the same, so they are recurrent, and they keep repeating the same issue over and over, and they manage to fix it quickly, but then it comes back, meaning that they do not address the root cause of the problem, but they work more with the symptoms. Okay, let's treat it because it's urgent right now. So I would say, first of all, there should be intention to work with communication intentionally. This is not something that will work on its own. You have to build it intentionally, and you have to create the right environment for that as well. You have to have psychological safety, and you have to have awareness. But first of all, if you want to start working with it intentionally, start with your own preferences. How do you communicate? How do you come across? Check in with others. Because how effective communication is, it's not up to me to decide. It's, for instance, up to you when we are in a conversation. So I can check with you, Florin, like what is that you understood from that? What are you taking with you from our conversation? Was it the message that I intended to send across? Was it the action that I wanted to inspire in you? So starting with this, I would suggest using some assessments. And today there are many assessments. I use specific assessments. I know that you also follow John Maxwell, and you use your assessment that help leaders map their preferences, how you behave in different contexts, how you communicate, what's your dominant style, how you communicate under pressure, how your style shifts. So I think this self-knowledge is crucial before you start building relationships with others. So starting building relationships with ourselves. So the very first step, so this would be my 10 cents to advice.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, and I love the assessments because it takes the subjectivity out of a situation. I know many organizations use 360-degree assessments, and they are also good, but at the end of the day, it's someone's subjective perception of that person, and many times, if let's say my leader would send me a 360 degree assessment for me to feel for them, well, how honest and how direct can I be in that assessment? Is still at the end of the day my leader. So, but when you do a self-assessment, that the ones that you use or what we use, now it's just you about your style, and then each one does their own. And then when we combine this in a team report, then we compare the different styles, the differences and the gaps become very, very clear. And I love that these assessments bring an element of objectivity. So we're able to take out the personal preferences out of the situation. And what I have found is that many times we think people are complicated and the communication is complicated, but working with communication, you're going to start to see patterns. You're going to start to see these styles, whatever framework you're using. These styles tend to be, as you say, more direct. These styles tend to be a little bit more passive. These styles tend to be more active, and so it allows you to not go with like just completely blinded. You have some um, you know we don't see this as boxes. You put people in boxes, but you have some patterns that you could look for. It's like you go out in the wild, and then you know how a bear looks like, and when you see something that could look like, oh, that could be a bear. But what if you have your idea is, I'm looking for a bear, and you see a rabbit, or you look at and you don't apply the right tactic in that moment? It could be very dangerous. So what understanding each other communication styles and understanding our communication style, using a framework or a method, allows us to see those patterns in communication, and it creates, as I have found, it creates the people are more aware of the other person or the other people styles, and many times, with just one exception, the world is composed of other people. and chances are
Mm.
they have a different communication style. So if, you know, when I work with teams, I start at the same place. We usually do. That's many times many organizations, the way I got into working with that organization is that I offered the leader one of our communication assessments, and we walk through their report and say, oh, it would be wonderful to see this and to understand my team. So I agree with you. The first step, we need to start with awareness. So the first step is probably to admit that we have some gaps, and then to try to understand, you know, how deep those gaps are, how big they are, and
I would
assessing.
say being curious, you know, I think in leadership, you have to have this learner mindset that it's not about even like, it's more cheerful when I put it into this framework. So what if you were curious about how you come across to others and just evoking the curiosity? And in terms of the assessments, I need to add a very crucial factor that use it only as a framework, only as guidelines, because in intercultural communication, I meet lots of people, especially when I work with engineers. They say, okay, Alena, Americans work this way, Swedes work this way. But then we talk about people. It's people who meet, not cultures. And even when you might assume that, oh, I'm working with a Japanese colleague, and in Japan, I know that it's high context communication, respect is maintained this way, and the etiquette works like this and like that. But then I might be totally wrong. This knowledge might actually prevent me or lock me in assumptions based on knowledge and facts. But this person's culture, my personal culture, might be different. It might be shaped by multiple experiences, other experience which I don't know about. So that's why I would say with the assessments, it's very important to use it as a conversation starter, not something that defines this is your style, but more exploration part. And when you do it from the cultural lens perspective and understanding how culture might impact your behavior and your communication, then you start building more navigation skills. So it's like a GPS that you have. You can't know all the answers. Me being, I do not call myself an expert, I am a learner, but I see myself more like my expertise lies in intercultural communication and leadership, but still having all the knowledge that I have misunderstandings. I do mistakes. I end up in conflict situations. The difference is how I navigate and how I respond, what kind of questions I ask. So that's why it's about your ability as a leader to navigate difficult situations, sensitive situations, misunderstandings, bridge the gaps, notice when things are off. So I think it's important, but starting with assessment and like a debriefing session or coaching session, composing a team's culture map where you actually have all the preferences on the map. You see the gaps. You can compare with culture as well. With the national culture, you can have an open, fulfilling discussion and learn more about each other. This is something that they can create the foundation for better communication in the future. So very, very crucial to keep it in mind.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you when it comes to generalization. Like, you know, thinking about Swedes or, you know, Japanese or Chinese in a certain way, because that's why we do these assessments individually, right? We want to
Mm.
understand the person communication style and how much, because we know that in each uh, culture or country, there is a blend of all communication styles. The blend would be different between, you know, a Nordic country, you know, Southern European country, maybe, you know, the United States or Japan, but it's still a blend. So you'll still have all communication style, all the direct and the indirect and the passive and the aggressive styles in every single country. So using those generalization that you mentioned, it's usually a blind spot. We make an assumption about how people operate based on a very small amount of data maybe. And
Mm.
usually if we would use the objective knowledge, let's say someone brings you in, you share some knowledge about, okay, this is how this culture tends to work in a workplace, that would be good. But what happens is that someone has one experience with one person from that country, and all of a sudden, oh, all Americans are like that. And I had this experience with someone that I want to work with, and the moment they heard about John Maxwell being an American, said, "Oh no, I hate Americans." And I was kind of, okay, well, tell me more. How come? Oh no, but when I had my first role in '97, I had an American boss, and it was like this, like that, and I cannot work with Americans, and I don't like their leadership style. So you can see clearly that the person has some blind spots because they had an experience, probably was not a very pleasant experience with someone from a specific country, and then you can assume that everyone from that country is that way, or the leadership style of that country is in the certain way. So I completely agree with you. We should not. This is leading by assumption, and that never gets to good results. So let's now think a bit about. Um, so we talk a bit about the in a small scale in a team. We want to understand first our style. We want to understand the style of the people we work with, the people we collaborate with, the team, and then when we start to add more teams to the kind of landscape, right? We kind of start to scale up a little bit now. And I'm thinking of an organization that I work with, that they started, I think it's 4 years ago, with like 15, 20 consultants, and now they are at 120, and they expanded in the US, and they have other offices. Now all of a sudden you have a culture that is the company culture, right? So not the national culture of the people, but it's a company culture. So now how do we break these silos, or not allow them to be created inside an organization? When you add, even inside the team, but when you add a couple of teams, what do we do, what should leader do to kind of try to bring people together, and not necessarily allow for these silos to be created? What's your take on that?
Oh, my take on that, it's all about relationships and how we create relationships. And obviously, it's more challenging now when I see lots of teams working remotely, or there might be some people in one department sitting all together in a physical location, and then they have other team members working from elsewhere in the world. So it becomes more challenging, but it also give us more opportunity to actually develop and test different like communication techniques and how we bring people together. But generally implementing some small things, I shared before, creating this team culture map when people know each other's preferences, when they also openly discuss about their availability hours, when they are ready to respond directly, or when they are like off, especially when they work across different time zones. Because I still meet organizations that are completely unaware about time zones difference in global setting, and it becomes a big challenge because they don't get responses on time and they count on those. So building those relationships, discussing how you want your team culture be, how you want it to be. And I think this type of discussions can also help us not only identify the gaps or possible gaps between people on an interpersonal level, but also like when they create this vision of the team culture, like how do we need to work to be successful? How do we need to work to be effective? What should be at place? Then they can also analyze what is my stretch between like what I'm used to and what are we trying to accomplish as a team, like our common goal, our common take on our work together, and then work towards that as well. And leadership role here is crucial because then you guide people with your questions. You discuss, you bring those topics for discussion, and it can be some small, like 5 minutes discussion in the beginning of stand-up meeting or like online meeting when you connect for the updates. for example, to discuss something not related to work directly, that allows you to get to know people better and to connect better. So this is something I'm thinking more actionable, right? So something that you can take with you immediately, something that you can start thinking about, like, okay, how do I nurture relationships? How do I create the environment? Like, what's one thing I can do today to create better environment for my team, to build relationships, to connect better? And the answer will be different for every leader listening to us today, right?
Yeah, I like that, and it's in alignment with what I do when I work with organizations. We try to kind of design the shared language, or maybe the common values of that team. And sometimes, or not sometimes, many times organizations have some stated values, but those values are somewhere on the website. And if you take one person randomly, from the ground floor of the organization, they might not be able to kind of tell you what the values of the organization are. And more importantly, they were not going to be able to tell you what does it mean for them. So when we work with organization, we try to help them kind of shape the what we say, the context of that communication for the different teams. And one thing that we know helps is for them to think about, what do we want people to think, act, and how do we want them to interact. This is when we I have a workshop that I do usually with teams. Is called culture shaping communication. What we mean by that is that your communication is going to shape your culture. The way you communicate is going to shape your culture. And then when we think about culture, we help leaders think about, okay, in this communication, what you're gonna, let's say you have a town hall you want to host with your team. What's what's the outcome you want? That's how do we close the gap. It's, you have an intention. What's your intention? The intention is, how do I want people to, and we ask them, how do you want people to think? What do you want them to think after they hear the message? What do you want them to do? That's the acting part. And how do you want them to interact with each other and with clients? And so through this filter, we're trying to have a consistent message that creates more or less that culture, that shared language in the organization. Because here is how we, here is how we always respond to clients. I think this is an example from, if I'm not wrong, it's from Chick-fil-A, which is a kind of a restaurant chain in the United States. And I think the way they reply to you when you go into one of their stores and you order something, they always say, "It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure." That's how they respond, and that's kind of the shared language. That's kind of part of the culture. And this is again communication. And I remember a story where the the founder went around. So they implemented this idea. We're gonna reply with, "It's my pleasure." And then he went around and visited some stores, and people were not replying with, "Is my pleasure." And then they were not sure why. And because it took a lot of time and repetition for the language actually to become from where it was decided, to become, the way we do things here, to become part of the culture. And this is where I see leaders play a crucial role. Because when we think about communication in your workplace, it's not like it's not happening. It's always happening. Like culture, you have a culture, but is it the culture in the communication by design? Is it something that you design, that you want, or is it something that it's inherited and is maybe part of each individual that is part of the team? They all come with their own experiences, expertise, background, national culture, personal culture. They come in, and you have now a gathering of people, and the strongest voices usually come to the surface, and they dictate the culture. So when we work with people, we want them, with organization, we want them to think about how they create this context for the communication, and what would be kind of those shared languages, and maybe the way we do things here, kind of breaking down to the communication. Because we have found that unless leaders take responsibility for that, then the strongest personalities and the informal leaders on the team may shape the way the team operates, and that's not always aligned. And my earlier example with the way I was introduced to other teams was that this person was an informal leader. They had a view of how things work around there, and they were introducing me with the concept of us and them, us and them, us and them. And if us leaders will allow that to happen, then that will create more or less the culture, and the communication would be shaped by the strongest voices in the team. I think this might be a bit off the purely communication topic, but if we put it into the context of the organization, I see that culture plays a critical role.
It relates to influence as well, right? So how do we balance that? I was actually thinking about it in terms of the shared language, and I had this example, an interesting one. There is one method that got very popular. It's developed by Kim Scott. It's called radical candor. I don't know if you heard about it. It's in communication field, and it relates to feedback. It relates to like how we build relationships, how we want to work, like use radical candor. So there are several zones there in this framework, but radical candor is about caring personally and challenging directly. So the intention behind the model and the framework is very good. So you kind of bring together a very practical perspective, like task-oriented, and also relationship perspective, right? But then I worked in organization that tried to implement this method, as they got a training on that, and they wanted to create it as a shared language. So this is one of our values. We want to encourage people. We want to show that we care personally and we can challenge directly. So they encouraged people working in the company, employees challenge their managers directly, so address the issues, share their feedback, and it simply didn't work in Japan. Even though they created it as a shared language and they showed the importance of it, how crucial it is for the success, but it just didn't land there because people grew up in a different environment there, and they use different communication style. So that's why we can't simply impose shared language. So it should be co-created and adapted. And I see lots of struggles, even in Sweden, like from the requests that I get for the trainings, like, okay, decision-making, Swedes, Americans, very different approaches to decision making, miscommunication, deadlines shifted, disruption in production, and things like that, because people can't align. They are used to different styles, even if they verbally share that effective communication is one of our top values and priorities, or feedback is very important. But then what do you do? What's the action that follows? Might be different. So I would say it brings us to like level up there as well. How do we create the global awareness, and how we stretch our comfort zones? So it's a lot about comfort zones, because the same method can land well in one environment, but can backfire completely, like with the opposite effect in another environment. So here I think it's important to rather focus on how do I navigate? How do I adapt my style as a leader? What's the quality of questions I ask? What's the quality of conversations that I have with people? So I'd say it's very critical for like to bring communication to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we try to kind of summarize a little bit, some key takeaways, from my side, I really believe this us and them, mindset is critical. Uh, we actually do exercises with teams, so we bring these, different puzzles, so we put teams in groups of 4 to 6 to, build a puzzle. It's an easy puzzle. The whole idea is not to spend the entire day building a puzzle, but it's actually to get what the point is. What we do, we switch we swap some of the two pieces from one puzzle to the other one, and then we then give the team that fulfills or builds the puzzle first kind of wins, or we don't. It's not necessarily a competition, but we just no, now finish this puzzle. Almost never, when they get to having those two pieces, when they see they don't fit, before that, they almost never think about them as a team, like everyone. Even these are people from the same team that we split in groups, and they don't see themselves as a team. The first thing when they say, oh, we're missing some pieces. And they don't think about those pieces being, at the next table. So it's just ingrained in our mindset that we are us and they are them, and then because this is our task, so we focus on the task. And the exercise is just meant to help them see, oh well, in order for you to succeed, you might have some pieces that you need from the other team, and they might have some pieces that they need from you. And but it never fails. Almost always they only see themselves here. This is the table, this is us, and they are them, although they are all part of the same team. So I think this mindset, us and them, it's a critical thing. And the more we as leaders are able to shape that communication, so we don't allow this us and them mindset not challenge. Because I hear sometimes, well, we don't know what happens in China. We have these Chinese owners, and China is like something we don't understand. It's like a unknown for us. And I challenge that. Is well, China may be, but this person that you need to work with, you might know something about them, and you can get interested in them. Maybe you learn some things. So we shouldn't allow this us and them to be, to live and to actually be accepted as behavior. And the other thing that I see as well, I'm gonna get to you immediately.
No, I just wanted about this part about us and them. I think it would be very actionable to actually like get an advice from you. What can you do to shift this mindset? Like, for example, if I'm sitting and listening to you now, and regardless of like the context and situation, more or less it exists in every company. Like we have silos, and like what can I do to shift this mindset from to we instead of us and them? Like one practical thing.
So one practical thing that I advise leaders to do is to encourage and praise collaboration. So if you have individual KPIs and your team is actually going to be evaluated based on how they achieve their goals, that tells them, well, what's important is my individual goals. But if as an organization you have, for example, you highlight collaboration initiatives where maybe different teams or different departments have collaborating together, if you as an organization put praise on that, if you maybe, for example, your KPIs, your goals, your objectives are common or collaborative objectives, that you need this other team to do something. And when we work in cross-functional organization, many times there is pushback, because when I try to set goals for my project leaders, and they said, well, but my goals depend on Alena doing her job. Exactly. That's why you are the project leader. So now your goal, to achieve the goals, you would have to collaborate with Alena. If she's working on your project team, now you would have to, yeah, but I don't want to depend on other people. And that was kind of the pushback that I got from the project leaders. And that was exactly the point. We want them to collaborate. So one thing we could do is, first of all, to remove the us and them language from ourselves as a leader, and then to look for how can we reinforce the idea of collaboration instead of the ideas of individual accomplishment. And the thing that we see is what gets rewarded gets done. What gets highlighted gets reinforced. So if you want people to collaborate more, now you have to praise people for collaborating. So you would do something like with your team or with your teams, you would say, well, I really love how you step up and work with this other team on that project. That's really great. That's actually what we want to see more. So now I praised you in front of the team or the others, and people say, oh, okay, so then to get praise or to at least, advance here, if that's what you want to advance in your career, collaboration seems to be one of the things that will help us do that. So people have different motivations, but they would see that you highlight the behavior that you want to see in the team. So that's where I would see you. We call this kind of facilitating some cross team visibility, helping people see that the others are not so different. I'm sure you do these kind of exercises where you ask people to look for similarities instead of looking for differences, because they definitely can see the differences between the different cultures, right? But when we shift the mindset and we say, let's look at what do we have in common, they realize that they have a lot more in common than they thought.
Yeah, that's true.
So this makes sense.
Yeah.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing this action step, because I still feel that we are at the point of wrapping up. So just giving it, like bringing it together and giving something actionable, something that people can try doing, not on the top of everything they have, but something that is easy to integrate to their daily routine.
Yeah, yes, that's what I would do. Would you want to add something to that? Is there something you would build on top of?
I think it's good if we summarize, because you shared the about the importance of the shifting the mindset, us and them towards we, and finding and building common ground. And from my perspective, it would be taking communication seriously, not something that you have it on a daily basis. And this is something that you can create intentionally, thinking about the impact, and think about it that 90% of leadership is about communication, because you need to make yourself visible as a leader, how you treat others, how you show up. It's all in communication. It's much more than words. It's the body language, it's your posture, it's your tone, it's the energy that you bring to the room. So think about, what would you like to bring to the room, actually? How would you like to show up? And check for your cultural lenses as well. What are your preferences? How do you function under pressure, in stress? How it shifts, how it impacts others, and how you can create a common ground with other people so that they are aware about their communication styles, how they behave in conflicts. And because sometimes they might misinterpret someone with grumpy face as someone that is not approachable, but it could be the face of a very focused person working on the thing, right? So checking in on the preferences with others, how they prefer to receive feedback, what motivates them. It can already create a simple conversation about that, can give you so much value. So I would encourage everyone to just open up for that and try it and see what happens.
Yeah, I like that. And the one thing I learned is that we sometimes say that, well, that's not so important. I'm just going to send this email. It's going to be done. It's done. I move on with my next task. But I realized that everything matters. Like everything in communication, everything from what you say, from the tone of voice to the body language to the posture, every single detail matters. And this sometimes could be overwhelming. Now, some leaders say, well, I cannot really think about everything here. Okay, just pick one or two things you want to work on. Okay, so from what Alena has shared, from what you find from your assessments, from the things you do, pick one or two things and focus on that. If one thing for you is the tone of voice, just focus on that. Maybe for the next 90 days, just focus on that. Don't try to fix everything at once, because it's not going to work, and it will take a lot of mental energy and energy for you to shift your communication style overnight. But what you can do is you can choose, if the call to action for today is choose one thing that you're going to want to work on for the next 90 days. And then, do some research, find some content, find some courses, hit us on LinkedIn. We're going to be more than happy to help. and then just focus on one thing. And when you have improved that over the next 90 days, then you can add another layer to that, right? Then you can add another layer to that. So if this sounds like kind of overwhelming a lot, choose one area to focus on. Maybe choose one team member that you want to improve the communication with. Maybe choose one team or one aspect of the team. Maybe the Monday meetings, whatever. But start small and build on. Don't get overwhelmed of all the things that we share. It
It
just,
was a lot.
yeah, just pick one and focus on that and be laser focused on that. And once you have built that muscle, then you can start the next type of exercise. And like when you start exercising, you're probably not gonna go and work, all the muscles of your body, full strength. You're gonna probably start with something. Same here.
Yeah,
Build
this
that
is a
muscle.
good advice. I
Yeah.
think great advice to wrap up. Start small, small steps, and exactly those make a huge difference.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it alone. Alena and I work also one-on-one with executives, with leaders. We coach them, but also with teams. So if there's something we can do for you, or we can, if you want to try one of our assessments, you just reach out, and we'll be more than happy to share those with you and then guide you on what your first step could be.
Yeah, this is a brilliant add-on, Florin.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's my pleasure. And I think it was a good conversation. I hope you got value out of today. If you have follow-up questions, drop those in the comments. We'll be more than happy to go through those and address those. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We look forward to see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.